So today has unofficially become Pocket Radio Day because I received this, which is not working, in the mail, and I'm quite looking forward to this. This is a very thin Panasonic, in fact, a Panasonic Mr. Thin, and this model is the RF-16. The RF-15 is the same radio but without the clock. This is a 1970s pocket radio. And my grandfather had the 015 and when I was a kid, and I was very taken with it. I thought it was just the coolest thing, a little thin pocket radio, and that. I've always had a thing for these. So a little while ago, I bought this model, which is the RF-18, I think? I can't remember. But this is a later model, same thickness as that one in the case, opens on the other side, but otherwise very similar. And this one works perfectly. There's no reason to open it up. It's a perfectly functioning radio, and actually a pretty darn good radio. So, in fact, this one, it's someone put their driver's license number or something on the side, so it's not really, a terribly collectible one, but it works. Case is nice. I've actually got the box and everything for it, so it might be, if I ever get one that's in, a perfect shape, I'll then have a box to go along. But this is great. It's excellent for listening to the news at your desk, which is pretty well the design purpose for it anyway, I expect. This is an Eaton Elite Mini, which has the advantage of being a shortwave radio. And this is not not the most sensitive shortwave receiver out, but it will pick up strong shortwave stations, and if you clip it to an antenna, it does surprisingly well. Its strength is that its user interface, despite just having, a volume knob and a tuner knob, and then a scan function, it's really fast to get to stations. It's got no memory, it just scans, it has no settings, but it's, if you just want to see if there's anything fun floating around in the evening, this makes a nice shortwave radio. It's also a very, very good FM radio. This is not the focus of my interest today, nor even is this the focus of my interest today, although this is great. You gotta love that design from that era, eh? You want more plastic here than this one, which has the same kind of construction as a Casio calculator of this era. This is what I want to have a look at. I don't expect that I will be able to fix this as I talk about this today, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this handheld. Everything associated with the radio seems to work fine. The tuning knob works, the number works. Putting in batteries doesn't do anything, but these switches associated with the clock and the clock radio system are entirely locked up, as if they've got something sticky or something in them. All I want to do today is to have a quick look inside and see what's up. This is actually in very nice physical shape on the outside, right? It looks very good. There's some sticky tape there. It's had one clunk in the corner, but it's not overly corroded in the battery compartment. Maybe a little bit. That might be worth doing before trying anything else. But and then that's got the supposed to have a silver oxide battery for the radio. Unfortunately, they've printed what's required there. I don't think I have one of those, but I might. I'll have to check. But what I need to do, because those switches are jammed, really the most important thing is to get the covers off, have a look, and see what's going on. And in terms of that, there's no obvious screws. Drop it and make it worse. There's no obvious screws or anything with the exception of one big Phillips screw here. So I'm hoping that will allow you to lift this whole back off. These covers may in fact just be applied over the snapped on over the plastic. That was not an uncommon kind of construction method. It's got an open back on the, and there's the speaker. That's pretty good. And the serial number, you gotta like 1278. right? 1278. And these things are all over all over eBay. A working one, by the time you shipped it to here in Toronto, is about $100 Canadian. It doesn't, the price between whether it has the clock or whether it doesn't, so between the 015 and the 016 doesn't seem to vary that much. This one was only $26 US because it wasn't working. So I've got that screw out. I'm a little worried that I see some green stuff around it, and I do wonder if someone has had a go at cleaning off these terminals. I mean, they just really don't look that eroded, so I don't know. I will say that I moved up in screwdrivers to get it out. Started with that one, then went to that one. That one really should be replaced. And then finally had to go to that one to get it out. So is there a dot on it? It might actually not be Phillips. It might be Japanese standard screw. Anyway, it's out, and we'll see where that takes me. I will say that that battery compartment, on the other hand, looks like it's been pretty bad, and someone's cleaned it out. Wouldn't have thought a silver oxide battery would leak like that, so we'll see what we see when we get inside. Well, I've stopped my first attempt to open this because I'm concerned that I'm going to damage it, and this black plastic along the side has gotten extremely brittle. I'm not sure whether I cracked that or whether that was cracked first, but I'm going to have to find some instructions online about how this opens. It isn't obvious. It might slide, but I thought you'd remove that screw and the back would mostly come off easily, and it did not. So yeah, I'm going to have to do some poking around. Okay, well, after some difficulty, I managed to unclip it easily enough. The problem was that this piece had cracked, in fact. I was attempting to do it correctly, and that can be glued back. There also has the metal has separated a little bit from this plastic back, which is in fact cast directly onto the metal. But I think I will be able to get some glue underneath there and glue it back on along with these pieces here. So I think that will be relatively easy to fix. Well, good enough for my purposes. Now the trick is going to be to get the board out so I can get at the front. It's not looking too terrible right now. You can see the wires here where the ferrite, which must be on the other side, comes through. There's the speaker. Some sort of shielding there over some aspect of it. And this looks to be the clock module up here, which has a switch on it, which affects the clock mode. And there's the tuning condenser. I don't know what there is under there. So the question will be to figure out how to get this out of the board out. And I'm not seeing a lot of screws, but maybe there are that I just don't see. Okay, there's a screw there. There's a screw there. That nut seems to attach the tuner, which has a little gear that comes in. So I could remove that little screw. That would be okay. Okay, there's a plastic clip here, which I've released very carefully. I think maybe it's only the black plastic that's so brittle after all these years. This gray plastic seems to be stronger, but I'm going to be very careful with anything plastic that I see in here, on the grounds that any of it might be very brittle. So there's that. It feels like it's starting to come free, but there's still something. So I will investigate that. Okay, well, it looks like the knobs have to be removed. For the volume control, the screw actually did unscrew on the middle. For the tuning knob, it appears to work differently. The screw on the center turns on the volume knob. The screw on this does not turn when you tune. And I think the solution is going to be to remove this nut on the back, and it should hopefully lift out. Anyway, that's what we're going to try. Okay, I removed the little tuning knob and its screw. And then there's one more little screw under here, hidden underneath the earphone jack. So I've got it open, and this is the radio. It all looks fine. That's a wax, which they've dumped all over a bunch of stuff in here. I mean, it might be that these capacitors are bad, but it's 78, right? They're probably good enough for a radio. But what I do note is that this clock module is heavily corroded. And it looks like there are a bunch of very tiny nuts, which I'm not sure I've got the tools to open without doing damage. It's required to get that open. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this alone for the moment. I'm going to put some of the screws back in where they were so I don't forget where they are. I'm going to order a big bottle of deoxit and a set of very small nut drivers to get these little nuts off. And I'm going to make an attempt to glue those case pieces back together and wait until I've got all of that. Because my guess is that this works. And I really need to see this board, or at least, make some attempt to clear it out before I have a hope of making it work. If this is bad, it looks like, you see, the control wire for the radio comes up here, right? So this is plus. This is minus from the batteries. Plus comes up in here into the clock module and then comes out through this cable, which has 3 conductors, I think. 3 conductors there. And my guess is what this is doing is there's also black. My guess is black is ground, and then one of these is radio on, and one of those is alarm, which is presumably produced by a circuit of some sort on here. I mean, it would just be an oscillator of something, so really running the amplifier, so I wouldn't expect there to be much to it. There's no chips on here, right? The only chip is probably going to be in here. So my guess is that the corrosion here has wrecked this, and then probably what my solution to this is going to be to bridge whichever one of these wires needs to go over to the power to get the radio working, and then we'll function without the clock. But it might be that if I get into this clock module, I'll be able to clean it out enough to get it working. But the fact that it's chewed up enough that no power is getting through it at all, and these switches don't. Well, that one, it's just these bottom ones that are over under the battery. So, yeah. I think the best bet is, before cutting these wires and starting to play with them, I think I should wait and get the tools required to have a go at this. Okay, I've pieced back the plastic here, and the plastic there had cracked when I opened it up as best I can. So the clips are on the sides along here, so that was a nut, and there is one here. So, I wasn't really doing anything wrong. It's just that this plastic, which they bonded directly to the metal here, is extremely brittle on this after 45 years or whatever, 40 plus years. So yeah, if you're opening one of these up, be extremely careful. And you can see where the clips are. There, 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 and there, I believe. Yeah, and there. And do not try to pry off the corners, which is what I did here, and snapped it off. I've got to say, I could not find a picture of this taken apart online. So that's one of the reasons why I eventually decided to just go for it. But if you are opening one of these up, be very, very careful to not do that. And also try not to separate the metal from the plastic, which started to come up when I was looking at it. And I ended up gluing that back on, and that's fine. As long as you don't bend the metal, you know, put a sharp bend in it, you should be able to get it back. So after looking up the prices of screwdrivers online in the size range I'd need, I decided to have a go at taking them out with the tools I have, and I've had some success. They're 2 millimeters, I believe. I wasn't absolutely positive, so ordering a single screwdriver wasn't very practical. I've got out all but 3, so we'll see. This one over here, I might have broken off, but I'm not sure. The others have come off okay so far. Okay, here's the moment of truth. That switch, which seems fine, comes off. There's presumably a decoupling capacitor of some sort there. And here's the clock module. This is not going to be easy for you to see. There's an NEC chip. There's that. And there's a whole lot of green gunk around there. And I still haven't freed up these switches around this side. So I'm going to get some alcohol, I think. And I'm going to get some alcohol, but I'm also going to get some vinegar and see if I can clean off the worst of that. So I've succeeded in getting all but one of these little, let's see, standoffs like that, which I just dropped down there, out. I checked there is continuity, and as you can hear, it's actually working, at least on AM. So there is actually continuity on that bottom piece here of the clock. So that's okay. I'm not sure we have continuity on all of these, and I really need to get that standoff off, and then I think I could lift out the clock and have a look at the switch on the other side. Unfortunately, I used isopropyl alcohol to try to clean it off, and I kind of sopped a bit of it in, and it takes off the metallization quite effectively, but none of that should be visible from the other side. It looks like I've managed to not wreck it around the display too badly. Yeah, maybe a bit. Anyway, as always, it was always clear that this radio was going to be a bit of a discovery to get going. I do have to say, I'm actually probably going to stop now and not go any farther with this, because I don't think I'm going to succeed in fixing the clock. So I don't know why the FM isn't working, possibly because the antenna's off, but I don't think so. I think there might be something else wrong there. Anyway, it's a game, this. Just to give you some idea of the size of the pieces involved here. Look at this tiny little washer. They are, as far as I can tell, now I've got it off, 2 millimeter screws. I mean, 2 millimeter nuts. The screws would be smaller, of course. Look at that. I mean, it's really at the edge of what I can effectively work on at all. But I've got a few things working. As I said, the radio's working, at least on AM. And I don't know if you can see, shining down in there somewhere. There it is. There's the light. So I got the light working for the display. I don't know how well that works. I'm not entirely sure I've got the bulb in the right place, but it looks like it's the right place. Well, anyway, we'll continue. Still something going on. That's as good as I can hope at this point. Once I've got this back together, then I'm going to put it away for a while because I'm getting rather frustrated, and then consider the rest of the radio. I'm going to have to look through my video and figure out exactly where that solders on. I think it solders on either right there or yeah, I think it solders on one of those right there, but it'll be easy enough to, no, it doesn't solder on right there. But anyway, it's there's an edge along here which has most of the stuff on it. It clearly comes right out there. Yeah, note that that joint wasn't terribly good after all these years. It's holding, but I could have done better than that. And the other thing that's really, I find remarkable about this is, although it's totally analog, it's definitely a late 70s design, but there's so much surface mount on it. It's all surface mount components, or mostly. Anyway, on this side, obviously on the other side, well, it's got, you know, all the traditional radio stuff I showed earlier, but, you know, I mean, obviously Walkmans and things, and certainly the smaller ones in the early 80s were mostly surface mount passive components. One thing I didn't show, and I probably should have, is that you can see in the back of this clock module 2 surface mount transistors that obviously do the switching between the 2 lines with the clock. Well, I've poked around to this a little bit more. I've got FM and AM working simply by wiggling around the various switches. I've also looked at my video, and that's where the antenna wire goes for the FM antenna, although, as always in my part of downtown Toronto, the FM reception is really just fine with no antenna. This switch here is working, so that's the mode switch, so that does make it possible to turn the radio on. It's a bit wiggly, and I'll probably just gop some contract cleaner on it when I've got some. I think this clock module is toast. I don't think there's any way of salvaging that, which is a shame because the other batteries have never leaked in here and it's fine. I mean, if they have, it's been fairly minimal, and everything else seems okay on it. So this has been very much a learning experience for me putting this together, which is why I bought a relatively cheap radio like this rather than buy a better one to start on. The first thing that I would say to anyone who's going to touch one of these is that this plastic here, you can see, well, we can work on the hazing from the super glue a little bit, but you can see that it cracked very easily trying to get that out. And I think that could be avoided now that I know exactly where the clips are. The second thing that I would say is that if you see that there's corrosion on one of these clock modules, I think you should see it's toast and not waste any time on trying to take it apart. That was an absolute bear. I've got it back together. I did one of these little bolts in there. I did break in removing or putting on. The rest of the radio is fairly conventional. I would think if it did have any problems, it would be a question of replacing the electrolytic capacitors, but I'm not getting a lot of trouble on that here, and they would be easy enough to replace. You just have to order the right size. It's not that small compared to modern electronics, right? This is still comparatively easy to work on, with the exception of that clock module, which is, as I said, I don't know why they didn't just clip it together. They've got a nylon sort of housing here anyway. It could have just been clipped together. But you see, I mean, it's going to look good from the front. The back is going to, or the sides are going to be a little bit more questionable, but the front will be fine, and I think it's going to work as a radio afterward. This is not one that I'm going to use. I really just wanted to have one of these and to have a play at at repairing it. I would like to get a 15 because that's the one I remember as a kid. But I'm actually going to look out for one of those that's working so I don't have to mess around with it as much anyway. And so the soldering iron should be getting there, and we'll get this back together and then give it a listen.
Is that though what the premier survey of hospitals revealed? No.
So here we go. It's back together. It's not perfect, and I managed to do a little bit more damage getting it open than I wanted to, but in its case it looks good. Clock doesn't work, nor is it going to, but you know, the front looks great. And I'm pretty happy. It means I've got one of these, and as I said, this one's mainly to have and to learn about what these looked like inside. And now that I've done that with a comparatively inexpensive one, I will be on the lookout for a decent deal for an RF-15 and maybe even another RF-16. I've got to say though, I'm going to be very wary of these that say that the clock doesn't work, because the power goes through the clock, and I had to clean that out before I could get the power function working. It was getting this switch at the top going that in fact is what saved this. And you have to do that because you don't have any other option as a power switch. It doesn't have a power switch on the volume knob. The rest of it's quite easy to get at. I would say that if I were going to buy one of these as a candidate for fixing again, I would be very tempted to get the 015 instead. There's a little bit more space for everything in there, and it doesn't, not having the clock, there's not a second battery to leak in it. And so, you know, you only have one possible leaky battery to deal with in that instance. The rest of the radio, apart from the clock, which was the victim of a leaky battery, seems to have survived very well. And I mean, my guess is that most of these are just working, right? That if unless something's happened to it, it's simply going to work and continue to be working. I've got to say, the Panasonic radio that I had in the 80s, which was a larger pocket radio, can't forget the model number, can't remember the model number right now, but is one that you see on eBay from time to time. I don't think it survived one of my parents' moves, and I didn't think it was important to hold on to myself at that time. But it worked perfectly up until just a few years ago, and I have no reason to believe that it still isn't. It's really when you get into the 90s and the bad capacitors, which I found in a Sony Walkman fairly recently, where I replaced them all, but 2 out of the 6 or 7 were bad. And I think once you get into that era, then things become much more questionable. And obviously the older stuff from the 60s, they're all trash. But that stuff's all big enough that you can work on it easily. So I'm going to try to get my hands on more of these 70s, early 80s kind of pocket radios. I love these Panasonics, and I would like to have more of them. And yeah, so I'm all in all fairly pleased with this project. It worked out about as well as I could hope. And I have now learned a lot for the next one that I work on.